On this channel, we have had the opportunity to hit a few different World War I battlefields. We've been to the battlefields of Verdun and to Vimy Ridge and the battlefields of Arras. But we haven't had a chance to visit the battlefield where I am right now. And from where I'm standing, I can look and I can see 4 different cemeteries. This is the place where on July the 1st of 1916, the British would have their absolutely most disastrous day in military history. Where we are right now are on the battlefields of the Somme of 1916. All right, now as I mentioned, we are on the Somme battlefield, and I am so excited to be here. This is a place that a lot of friends of mine have visited. It's a battlefield that I've wanted to visit myself for a long time. Again, this is the spot where on July the 1st of 1916, the British are going to have their bloodiest day in military history with nearly 58,000 casualties on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. And where I'm standing right now is at Sheffield Memorial Park, which is kind of going to be on the northern end of the battlefield where the British are going to have really their biggest challenges. Now, I know a little bit about the Battle of the Somme, but I have a few people with me who know a lot more than I do. With me today is Dan Hill of the YouTube channel Battle Guide and the podcast Not So Quiet on the Western Front. Great resource for learning about the First World War. And also Rob from the channel History in Your Hand. So throughout this series, we're going to have some friends that are going to be popping in and helping us all to learn a little bit more about the Battle of the Somme.
So right now we're on the northern part of the northern sector, the British sector in fact, of the Somme battlefields, infamous in British military history for 1916. Of course a much longer battle than quite often we give it credit for, but we're in the location where it's most infamous for the 1st of July 1916. And to give it a little bit of context, the whole reason this battle comes about, and it's a large-scale battle, it's actually pre-planned before the assault is to go in, before things really change in the early part of 1916, that the Allies are going to make an assault on the join between the line of the French armies and the line of the British armies to continue the principle of aggression, forward movement, and the general offensive. So to in effect drive the Germans back out of the area that they've occupied. But the Germans kind of throw a bit of a spanner in the works. In February 1916, they launch an assault quite away from here down at Verdun, and it really puts extreme pressure on the French army, who in response ask the Brits and Commonwealth allies up here to try and relieve that pressure by launching an offensive elsewhere. Although it had been partly planned, it becomes much more of a British effort. And we're in the northern part of the northern sector right here, where we're going to see perhaps the most tragic of all of the many tragic episodes that take place that day, which is the assault of the PALs on very heavily defended German lines. And it's a bit of a perfect storm in some senses. The Allies totally overestimate the ability of their own artillery, underestimate the preparedness of the German defences and underestimate the ability of their own artillery to break things like barbed wire, to suppress machine guns, and ultimately we're going to see all of those things combine in a really horrific incident right here on this ground.
Right now, we are looking along what would have been the British front line in July of 1916. So off to our right through here, is pretty much where you would have had the front line trenches. And then right in here, well, you can see the remains of the support trench that would have been just behind the front line trench. Now, there were 4 little copses of trees that were along this front line that were nicknamed Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John copse. The trees are all connected now, but in 1916 there would have been 4 separate little pieces. And here in Sheffield Memorial Park, well, you can still see some of the shell holes and the craters in this forested area. And right up here they have a map that helps us to understand a little bit more of where we are. Okay, so here we are on the front line trench of the British. Okay, and then you have the Germans that are over in this area. So the British are going to be attacking towards the village of Serre. We have some rude bird that has pooped all over this map. But anyway, along this line right here, you're going to have the 11th Battalion of the East Lancashire Regiment. Right up here is going to be the 12th Battalion of the Yorks and Lancashire Regiment. And then just beyond that, where you see it kind of bend back, is going to be the 14th Battalion of the York and Lancashire Regiment. All right, so anyway, on July the 1st of 1916, these guys are going to be going over the top right here from the view that we currently have, and are going to be advancing on the German line. And what we are seeing here are what are called PALS battalions that are going to be going over the top. And the story of the PALS battalions are just exceptionally tragic.
So we just stood by the memorial to the Accrington PALs, and that word PALs, so that comes from, towards the beginning of the war, it became pretty evident early on that the British Army was going to need a lot more men. So there was a recruitment drive put out. You might remember that famous picture with Lord Kitchener pointing, saying your country needs you. That was about recruiting men. Now initially when they set out, the hope was to have 100,000 men volunteer, and actually by the end of that first year they had more than 1 million volunteers who put themselves forward to join these PALS battalions. Now the idea of the PALS battalions was units that were recruited locally. So for example, the Accrington PALs recruited of guys who lived in and around Accrington. And that's the case all the way across. The 15th West Yorkshire Battalion, the Leeds PALs, guys recruited locally in Leeds, and so on and so on. Now the idea of that was that if men could volunteer and could serve with their friends, their neighbours, their work colleagues, maybe they would be more likely to put themselves forwards. Now it sounds like a great idea, because of course it gives you that extra camaraderie. Guys go together into the war. But of course there's a bad side to it as well, and something which happened exactly here at Serre. If these units, like the Accrington PALs, went into action in a bad sector where maybe that attack went wrong, loads of them were lost, killed, wounded or missing. And units such as the Accrington PALs lost so many guys that almost a whole generation of young men from that town was killed in this one attack. And just think about how that devastates a community. So not long after that, the kind of idea of recruiting the PALs changed a little bit, and you still had those kind of regional units, but they weren't recruited in quite the same way as they were at the start of the war.
We talk a lot about the artillery barrage in the days leading up to July 1st. So over a period of about 7 days, the British are going to fire about 1.6 million shells over on the German lines. And it basically to, of course, try and take out the German positions, but also to try and break up the barbed wire. What ends up happening is a lot of the barbed wire just goes up in the air and then comes right back down in a big, huge clump. And today, when you walk the battlefields of the Somme, a lot of the ground has been reclaimed by the farmers. and you can hardly tell, except for bits of detritus in the field that gets churned up in this time of year. You wouldn't know that there had been a battle here. Well, here in Sheffield Memorial Park, there's a bit of the area that is preserved that gives us a glimpse as to what the war did to the landscape in this area. So here you can see some very large shell craters that are just behind the lines. Okay, so right up here is the Frontline trenches. And then right here, this is evidence of what the Germans were sending back over to the British. We were back out here in no man's land looking down the British line. And in the days before the attack on July the 1st, there was just an incredible artillery barrage that the British launched against the German lines. And for all of these guys who were going to be in the first and second waves of the attack, they were told that there's no way that any of the Germans were going to survive this, that they could basically just walk into the German trenches. One of the things that they kept telling them is that not even a rat would be able to survive the artillery barrage that was going to be launched against the Germans. And unfortunately, when the whistle blows in the morning of July the 1st, these guys are going to go over the top, and what they're going to find is that this artillery barrage that was supposed to have killed everything is not going to achieve the desired objective that they thought it was going to achieve. So again, right here we have the woods. A lot of the guys, it is said, are going to be killed before they even get up to this cemetery right here. There was one individual by the name of Herbert Hall who was with the 12th Battalion of the York and Lancashire Regiment. I believe they were off to our left. But he said, "I heard the Germans calling from the trenches, 'Come on, Tommy, we are waiting for you.' It was weird. In perfect English. I killed a few, of course, and took a prisoner. He walked into us in no man's land. I brought him back and walked him to the back lines, passing a whole lot of British Army lying in stretchers, dead bodies, and all the rest of it. I don't know what happened to him afterwards. I think that somebody might have shot him." So imagine getting ready to go over the top. You've been told that all of the Germans are going to be dead, and you can hear these Germans in the other trenches calling out to you, saying, "Come on, we're ready."
So overseeing the attack here at Serre, there was a Brigadier General by the name of Rees, Brigadier General Rees. He was in charge of the 94th Brigade, part of the 31st Division that attacked here. Now he would have been up on the ridge line out here behind us, so just kind of beyond the valley on the far ridge. He was here observing this attack. Now there's a quote that he put together after the war where he described what he saw here, and I think it's quite a powerful quote. It kind of really gives you an idea of what happened here. He's talking about the second wave of the attack. So the first wave of the attack here at Serre has gone in, an attack which was absolutely decimated out here in no man's land. The guys in the second wave have seen that attack, and they went into the attack anyway. And this is what Brigadier General Rees described when he was talking about that. "I've never seen such a finer display of individual and collective bravery than the advance of that brigade. I never saw a man waver from the exact line prescribed for him. Each line disappeared into a thick cloud of smoke and dust, which rapidly blocked out the whole area. I saw a few groups of men through the smoke, but I knew that no troops could get through such a fire."
When you're driving through the Somme area, this is what you see a lot of, are these little cemeteries. And in places especially like this, you can pretty much assume that where you see a headstone, the man lying beneath it probably fell within sight of where we are. Now, you're going to find a lot of unknown graves through here, because right here in front of Serre, the attack begins on July the 1st, and it's going to get stopped right in its tracks. And then the guys who died in no man's land aren't going to be recovered until probably February of 1917, when the Germans pull back to the Hindenburg line. There was one guy by the name of Donald Cameron. He was with the 12th Battalion of the York and Lancashire Regiment. And he said, "At midday, the sun was hot and I fell asleep. You've got to remember that we've been up all night and we've been on working parties for a fortnight before that, digging trenches, filling sandbags. We were dead tired. When it was dark, we found our way back to the trenches. Out of the 800 men that went out, only 100 answered. The rest were either wounded or killed. At the time, our parents used to send out food parcels wrapped in cloth. So there were the parcels for 800 men waiting for us to be shared amongst 100. So the attack here is just going to be obviously devastating to the men who died, but it's going to be devastating to the living too. Being one of the guys who survived and probably carried some survivor's guilt. So here you can see, like on this stone right here, it says 2 soldiers of the Great War. And then there's also a Private J.R. Hill with the West Yorkshire Regiment, died on the 1st of July, 1916. And sometimes, like here on this one, here's an unknown, says West Yorkshire Regiment. This is where they were able to find like a cat badge, or sometimes they'll find their insignia or something like that, so that we know just a little bit about the individual who died right here in this field.
So one of the things I love about coming to battlefields, particularly the Somme, and having a chance to come back and explore with a little bit of free time, is to do so when there's an opportunity to bring something like an original artefact. And in the case of this is a trench map, a British 1 to 10,000 scale trench map of this very area that was probably last here in an officer's pocket in 1916. It's the little detail that I love, and you can see that he was here in February from a note at the bottom of the trench map which gives details of the proposed attack in the northern part of the Somme sector. And even this little note down here that says secret, not to be taken into the trenches. I mean, we've broken that promise 100 years later, but it's one of those things that is really powerful to look at and to understand that, the last time this was here, it was in the hands of somebody who was actually preparing to go over the top. And they were using this in a way, we can look at it as a fascinating historical resource, but this was potentially life or death for a number of men under his command. And that for me is just such a powerful thing.
The area that we are walking right now is the approximate location where the Durham Pals would have went over the top and started attacking the German lines towards Serre. And if you look, the city of Durham, by percentage of casualties, is going to suffer more than any other city in Britain. By the end of the war, 20% of the male population in Durham was going to be dead. So this was going to be just absolutely devastating, not only to the city of Durham, but to all of these little towns and villages and cities throughout Britain. All right, got one more spot that we're going to take a look at today before we move on. We've now moved over to Serre Road Cemetery number 1, and as you can see, this is a much larger cemetery with a lot more men who are laid to rest here. Now, for the British, the families of the fallen didn't have the option of repatriating the remains of their loved one back on British soil. So all of the men who died in the First World War for the British, their remains stay right here on French and Belgian soil. But what the British government would do is they would issue these memorial plaques to families of their loved ones so that they could remember them. And brought one of these memorial plaques with me today. So the memorial plaque that we have here today is for a man in the West Yorkshire Regiment by the name of Albert Spiked. And you can see his name engraved there on this memorial plaque. And unfortunately, Albert's remains were never positively identified. So he is one of the unknown, and it's possible that his remains lie underneath this headstone right here. You can see it says, "A soldier of the Great War, West Yorkshire Regiment, known unto God." Right next to him, you have a second lieutenant by the name of R. Stead, who died on the 1st of July, 1916, aged 31. You have a few other unknowns right here, and then a couple of other guys in the West Yorkshire Regiment who died on July the 1st. But even though we don't know positively where Albert's remains are, well, we do have his plaque here today to remember his sacrifice on the 1st of July of 1916.
I feel like one of the really powerful things when you come to a place as moving as this is to kind of understand the story across the whole rank range. Very often we talk about the private soldiers and the lance corporals and the corporals that go over the top, but of course it really is a very broad rank range that do. And maybe to a certain extent one of those ranks which often gets misunderstood on the 1st July 1916 is that of junior officers, because in many cases they're seen as part of the elite that send men to their deaths, but there's a subtle but very powerful distinction for me about that exact thing. And it can be found in just a simple phrase that kind of sums it up, and it's the idea of not saying, "Go on boys, off you go." In fact, what these guys say on the 1st of July 1916 is, "Come on boys, follow me."
All right, so that's it for this section of the Somme front. We have a lot more places that we are going to be going and visiting and learning about. We have Rob and Dan who are going to be with us and helping us along as we go. But as for now, we are on to the next place.